welcome back to the Strong Mind podcast. All right, this is a special one. It's with Shauna Coxsey. She doesn't really need an intro, I don't think, but for those of you who don't know who she is, she's one of the UK's and probably the world's most successful climbers. She's pioneered British female bouldering for a long time. She's a World Cup winner, she's an Olympian, and now she's a mother. But in this episode, she shares a lot. We really see her vulnerable side. We talk about what she was like as a young athlete, where her drive has come from. We talk a lot about her values growing up and how that shaped who she is now. We talk a lot about mindset, performance mindset, what it's like to be at the top of the competition climbing scene. We talk a lot about mental health. It's something that she's just started to talk about online. And I think this is the first time she opens up in much detail about her experience with anxiety, panic attacks, and disordered eating. So watch out for that if you find those things triggering. And also her husband Ned's experience with depression and what it's being like married to someone who suffers from depression. We also discuss the broader issues around eating disorders in climbing and the challenges of trying to change a system from the inside. Other themes that come up are this kind of tension between public image and private struggle, how to know what to share online when you are a professional athlete. We also talk about motherhood. It's one of her most open conversations, I think. Obviously, I can't know that for sure. But I think this is where you get to see your hero uncovered. It's kind of where you get to see what goes on behind the scenes. And I think my big takeaway is that I admire Shauna even more after this conversation. And I imagine that you will do too. In this conversation, there was a big crossover for me in the work that we do at Strong Mind and some of the themes that Shauna was talking about. So some of those themes were mindset, values, self-reflection, personal responsibility, positivity, self-honesty. And at one point, Shauna says something along the lines of, a lot of people don't know how to do that work, and maybe they don't have to because they're not professional athletes, and maybe professional athletes kind of are forced to do a lot of that work. But that doesn't mean that we can't all benefit from it. And it could be the thing that's really limiting your climbing, and not just from a performance perspective, but also just from like, how much do I get out of this sport? How much joy do I feel? Could this be better for me? Could I have a better relationship with climbing? And so whether you come to mindset work because you want to change something in your climbing or not, a lot of the people who are students of our courses or who work with us tend to find that it positively impacts their life too. So if you're listening to these podcast conversations and you're like, I feel like I could benefit from being a bit more self-reflective, I could benefit from looking at what my mindset is right now, what mindset am I operating with, how could I change that, how could I strengthen or soften some of these mindset traits that Shauna mentioned, for example. A nice way to start that process would be to do our guided mindset meditation. It's totally free to download. It's about 10 minutes. And yeah, it could be really beneficial for you. So if you're interested in that, check out the show notes for the free download. All right, enough of my waffle. Now I bring you Shauna Coxsey. Hi, Shauna. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm actually excited, like slightly nervous about this, but
Nervous?
yeah.
Why are you nervous?
It's so weird. I never get nervous like doing a podcast where I'm the guest, but for some reason hosting is like this whole other thing. I don't know if you feel like that when you do events and things, but it's one thing to answer questions, but to pose them, I don't know, it's a different headspace.
I think I thrive in that space. I'm like,
Do you?
I love hosting. I love being on the other side.
Oh, really?
I think it's because I'm so nosy and like curious that I just
Yeah.
gives you the freedom to actually ask all the questions you wanted to ask people. I don't know.
It is fun. It is fun for that. There's like people who are my friends who I'm like excited to do a podcast with, even though I could ask them these questions ever, but it's just a different space and it's just weird coming out with some of these questions, like just a normal conversation.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. So I don't know about you, Shauna, but I get bored, like just like talking about my life story again. Do you get bored of that?
Oh, how did you start climbing? How many times have you told that
Exactly.
story?
Exactly.
Do you know what? I don't
So
even think I get bored now because it's so ingrained in my brain. It's like I press play, like to
yeah, but I don't like that rehearsal. Um, so I want to ask you though. Let's talk a little bit about childhood. But do you remember climbing with me as a kid?
Yeah, of course I do. I mean, I was gonna say, you don't need to ask me my beginnings because you were there. Um, yeah, it's so crazy to think back to that now, Northwest Face days in Warrington. And I get asked a lot about obviously how I started climbing and the beginnings, and I often get asked about the shifts in the sport and the changes for how many women are climbing now. And obviously it was kind of just like me, you, Gemma Powell, and that was about it at the Northwest Base back in the day. Yeah, that's almost 30 years ago.
Oh my God. Wow, we're so old now.
I know, right?
Um, but yeah, so maybe just for the people listening, just run through, press play a little bit
No, it's fine.
on that, yeah.
But yeah, I started climbing at the age of 4 in Warrington at the Northwest Space Climbing Centre. And I started on the kids groups there because I'm not from a climbing family. So I did like the classic like youth kid groups, and quickly kind of got bored of having to wait my turn to climb. So my dad learnt to belay, and I just became obsessed from day one. And I started doing competitions at the age of 7 just because the local climbing centre, the climbing gym, they had a competition on there, which was a regional event. And I finished 3rd out of 3 and qualified for the
Nice.
national finals and went to, do you remember the national finals in Merthyr Tydfil?
Oh yeah.
You remember this? Which is in South Wales, I think.
Yeah, is that
And
wall still going even?
I have no idea actually. I've only been there that once, and that was a long time ago. And there's footage of this national finals, and I'm crying my eyes out. Like I'm clearly so overwhelmed. And it's funny to think that that kid wanted to keep going back and kind of achieve something. But I remember distinctly a climb off between the elite females, like the eldest girls in the class, which I'm pretty sure you were part of. I think it was you, Katie Witt, and maybe Leah Crane. I
Mm.
just remember watching and being like, "Oh my gosh, like I want to be as good as those guys, like those girls one day." And yeah, that's kind of my beginnings is starting in the kids club, starting in the youth comps, and wanting to be a World Cup winner. Maybe a bit of a gap there.
Yeah, and we'll cover a little bit of that gap. Um, but so I remember going to a talk by you once, and it's so funny because this thing that you said stuck in my mind so much that I actually use it in my talk. And
Oh no
basically,
way!
yeah, you said I didn't want to be like one of those climbers that sleeps in caves. I wanted to be an
Mm,
athlete.
yeah,
And I was in the audience when you said that, and I was like, "Oh, that's interesting," because I was exactly the opposite. Like, I
my
wanted to
opposite.
sleep in caves, and that's what I did. I like left
Yeah.
school and like traveled around the world and slept in caves.
Yeah, and I left school and traveled around the world and slept in hotels.
And it's so funny because I just make a joke about it in my talk. Because the thing is like climbing is so diverse, isn't it? And you've got people who do want to sleep in caves, and you've got people who want to be athletes. Why did you choose that athlete route, especially when it was like sort of against the status quo to
Mm,
some extent at the time, right? Like more people
yeah.
were into like outdoor climbing.
Yeah, and especially, at the climbing gym where we grew up, there weren't any comp climbers as such. And I think, like you and a few of the other like athletes, climbers, they did comps, but I'm still to this day not quite sure what it was that drove me to want to try and pursue a career in comp climbing. Because, even saying that out loud as a teenager was too scary for me to say that I wanted to be a professional comp climber. Like, that just didn't exist back then. It wasn't a thing. And I talked to my dad about it, and I was like, I want to try and win a World Cup. Like, I want to try and be world number one. And it just felt so ridiculous to say out loud.
And what age were you when you were kind of thinking that? And when do you know when you first said it out loud?
In my mid-teens, I think I would talk to my dad a lot about it. As I was kind of growing up through the youth kind of national circuit, and I got on the youth, like the GB junior team, quite young, so before I was able to do international competitions. And it wasn't super structured back then. And I think that for me, it was almost like a torment to be on the team but not be able to go to these comps. And you were on the team, you were going to the comps, and I was like this kid just left behind, like, oh. And maybe that's what like sparked it a bit more. And then the first coach that I worked with, I was 18 when I started working with my first coach, and he had me write down on a piece of paper what my goal was. And I remember it took me so long to write it down. And I remember it was in green pen. And I remember thinking, like, who has a green, like, ball pen? Like, this is so weird. I don't have the piece of paper, but it was so hard to write it down and like commit it to paper.
Even though you knew what it was in your head, like really in a
Yeah.
strong way. Yeah.
It was almost felt embarrassing, to have this big dream and to be British and actually say out loud that you want to be world number one just felt preposterous, like you can't do that. And
Well, dreams are always vulnerable in some sense, aren't they?
yeah,
Because
for
you're really
sure.
putting
Yeah.
yourself out there. Um, but you have no sense of kind of why. Could you have articulated at the time like why you wanted to be number one, like what it actually meant to you?
I was genuinely curious to know if it was possible. And I loved climbing, and I loved pushing myself and measuring that success. And I think because I didn't grow up in a climbing kind of family, I didn't have much exposure to outdoor climbing. It felt quite alien. And even to this day, I still get quite like anxious about rock climbing, but that's a whole other conversation. Um, but for me, the idea of competing felt quite natural in terms of my family are sports fanatics. They love watching sport. So there's always some sport on the TV. Um, they're the people who will go on a sports channel and just watch whatever's on there. They are the people who will organize their day to make sure they don't miss the cricket match and the football match. And they're just so passionate about sport, which is cool because I'm not really. I don't really watch sport. I don't like doing that. But I think it was quite ingrained in me that was where success led to in sport. And I always knew that I wanted to try and see what I could do on rock at some point. But for me, it felt very much like to be good at competitions, you have to do it when you have the opportunity, because that opportunity is not always there. Whereas for rock climbing, it felt like it could come after comps, and it didn't feel like I could do that the other way around. And also I could see a pathway to be a competitive climber. I knew indoor climbing, but that idea of trying to explore outdoor climbing was so daunting and so vast. And, I couldn't lean on my dad to help me, because he could belay, but yeah, he didn't know much about the rock climbing world. So yeah, I think I always knew that was the avenue I wanted to try and see if it was possible. As well, I grew up being like the strong kid at the climbing gym where everyone's like, you're amazing, you're going to do big things. And I was like, oh, maybe that's true. I don't know. I could try. So I think a lot of it was from kind of external influences, but also from kind of my family's obsession with watching sports, basically.
Yeah, I guess that's your values, isn't it? It's like they're the sort of
Yeah.
the values you're kind of fed from a young age. Do you think you're like naturally competitive as well? Like outside of climbing, do you find yourself sort of being that person who is just quite
Mm.
competitive with things in general?
I think I have been. And I think, I was recently thinking about like, all these different phases through life we go through, and like how different you are in your early 20s to your early 30s. And it's funny because I don't feel like competitive climbing has been that competitive for me in terms of against other people, because for me, I always wanted to go into a World Cup and beat all my peers on their best day. I didn't want them to have a bad day. I wanted to train to be better than them on their best day. That's why I quit when Yanya came along. But
Wait, is that a joke?
yeah, it was a joke.
Just checking.
Yeah. Well, maybe it's not a joke. I don't know. I was very to be done, and it was very clear it was Yanya's era. But I think for me, it's the competitive side is so personal. But yeah, I think I have a competitive streak for sure.
Yeah. So you said just then, you wanted to beat your fellow competitors on their best day. So that to me is like illustrative of a mindset where you're more interested in like what you can do personally and your performance rather than kind of these like just like the external metrics of like podium. But of course, as a competitor, you also want to make podium, right? So how do you kind of like balance those two kind of versions of success or those two approaches to competition?
I think throughout my life, I've kind of developed the life philosophy, if you want, of do something about it or get over it, which I'm sure there's a much prettier way to say that.
I love that. That's great.
I'm like, right, okay, they're my two options, because the third option is to suffer, which a lot of people choose unintentionally, and I do at times, but I'm the person that will speak up and say something, or I'll let it go. Like I don't have the time or energy to sit in a space that's uncomfortable and that includes suffering. So I kind of take that approach and have done for a long time in pretty much everything. And I think I've been this way since I was a little kid, and I think there's reasons why, but yeah, for me, it's always been very clear that other people's performances are entirely separate to my own, and there's no way that I can impact or influence that, and I don't want to. So I've always been very focused on what I can do, and after every single competition, I would stop and pause and process whether or not I was content and happy with my performance, regardless of the result. And I had to learn that, and I had to really detach my self-worth from what the number said on the screen. Yeah, of course I wanted to win. I wanted to podium, I wanted to make finals, and it was hard when I didn't, and it was hard when I wasn't content with that performance, but I would try to analyze why from a performance mindset as opposed to from a result mindset. So, I think I grew up a lot in my career, and, I mean, I was on the circuit from 18 years old to 26, 27. And it's quite pivotal years of your life in terms of development and how you kind of see the world. So I think that I was really fortunate to have my career and my successes when I did, and to have to work really hard to get my first World Cup win. And then everyone always like talks about how great it is to win, but kind of the turmoil of trying to win again and again is pretty brutal. And then to kind of navigate your career through the highs and the lows, I think kind of is either going to make you more robust or crumple you. So I very much chose which kind of vein I wanted that to go down.
Yeah. So, yeah, I love that. It's like you kind of, you're focusing on what's in your sphere of control. And I feel like that's not, just for people listening, that's not just important for a comp climber mindset. It's like that's the same for projecting outdoors as well, isn't it?
It's the same for so much in life, though. It's
Well,
how I
yeah.
approach kind of any conflict in my life. It's how I approach parenting. It's how I approach kind of day-to-day encounters. So I think, like I was recently talking to a friend of mine about traveling with their child for the first time, and I was like, you can only control what you can control. You can only control your own emotions. You can't, or not even your own emotions. You can only control how you act in that moment. You can't actually control your emotions, and you definitely can't control a toddler's emotions. So, if your kid's screaming and other people are getting upset, like what in that moment can you actually control? And it's how you act. And trying to convey that. And I was like, oh, I've learned that from like all my years competing and all my years dealing with the media and the whole social media world as well, because there's that side of it too. That's definitely taught me a lot. So I was like, oh, that's something that I've learned from this world.
Nice. Yeah. So would you be really honest with yourself even when you won? So say you won, but you didn't feel like actually you performed at your best. Would you
Yeah.
actually be self-critical in that moment too?
Oh my gosh, I'm like the most self-critical person. Yeah. And I think if you a lot of people kind of who compete and compete in an elite level are. Um, and I also have very consciously surrounded myself with people who I know like won't bullshit me. So if I,
Mm.
well, not even surrounding myself, like I have 5 older sisters who call me out and have been very conscious to make sure that I've stayed true to my values as well. But if I were to finish a comp and be like, that was amazing, I won, and Leah'd be like, you fell off the slab 7 times. Like, what? Leah was my coach when we were competing. She'd be like, that was terrible. And like my husband, Ned, is my biggest critic. And, it didn't matter if I won or lost. Even if I do a hard climb outdoors and I don't know, my foot slips and it's scrappy, he'll be like, that was a bit messy. And it's really funny when we're in like different cultures. Like if we're in the States and
Mm.
I send a hard boulder, and he's like critical afterwards, people are like, that's so rude. And I'm like, oh, thanks. Yeah, it was bad. I might even do it again. Um,
Yeah.
so not just myself, but I think the people I'm surrounded by as well.
Yeah, it's interesting that you would use the word self-critical because you could maybe also just call that like having a learner's mindset, right? Like,
Yeah. Or
uh,
analytical, I guess.
yeah,
Yeah.
oh yeah, analytical. How do you balance that? Like, does it ever tip over into like, oh, I just kind of feel bad about myself right now, and like it's not destructive? So how do you balance that,
Um,
or
I
do you?
don't always, would be the right answer, is that I don't always. And I think that that's a really human thing to kind of not always find the balance in kind of every aspect of life. But I think for me, it's that there's been so many different segments to my journey of being a professional climber and what that looks like, that now I don't struggle too much if I get weighed down by the negativity. I'm quite good at pulling myself back because I've done it so many times. And I think my career's been so plagued with injury that I've kind of always been navigating some sort of small disaster in my career that I'm trying to come back from or work around. And especially going through the British climbing team and all of the political drama that caused, there was always something we were dealing with and always something we were firefighting, whether it was with my body or with the processes or whatever it might be. So I just didn't have the opportunity to stay down for too long and to stay negative for too long. And I think as well, again, the fact that I surround myself with people who can see through me if I am trying to kind of fake anything. And I think I've held my team, so the team that I work with, and at the Olympics that was a lot bigger and now it's a lot smaller, but I held them to my values, which are trust, communication, and honesty. And I think a lot of people struggle with how honest I am sometimes. And there've been people who've come in my team and not made it because of that. Um, but for me, it's always been very much like, I will be open and honest with you. I will communicate with you. And if I get that back, we will have trust. But that's kind of allowed me to never be too deep into that negative side. And I've also seen the repercussions of what happens if you do get sucked into that too extremely. And I know I don't want to be there if I can avoid it.
It sounds like you just have like really high standards as well, right? Like as every competitor needs to have, or
Yeah,
professional
maybe.
athlete. Do you think?
I think I've never really thought about it like that. I think I just don't have time and capacity for low standards, which sounds really terrible, but I don't know.
I think is a deeper mindset there too, right? And I think that you wouldn't be as successful as you are if you didn't hold yourself to those high standards. Um,
There's also the fact that with climbing and with any sport career, especially competition climbing, that career is so short. And I always felt that, I always felt like this time is fleeting. And if I'm going to get it right, I have to do it right now. If I'm going to come back from this injury, it has to be as quick as possible. If I'm going to win more World Cups, I have to be doing it next season. If not next season, the season after. And then you add the Olympics into that, and it's like, okay, we can qualify at this point, and that's it. And the Olympics is now. And then it's 4 more years, which no one can plan to be at an Olympics in 4 years' time, because you don't know what you're going to do physically. You don't know who else you're competing against. Again, that's a whole other topic. But with competing, I always felt that pressure of, this is short. We don't have time and room for kind of growth and exploring relationships and kind of figuring out if people meet your standards or not. It was like, you come in and hit the ground running and be part of this team, and it works or it doesn't, because we just don't have capacity to nurture, which it sounds savage, and it was. And it's really weird to be on the other side of that now. But, the people who kind of existed in that space and that it worked, they're like, like the core pillars of who I am and how I work now. And I will work with them forever, like Paul Hagogi, the climbing physio, as he's known, and Leah Crane. They came to the Olympics with me, and like, they'll never not be in my life. Like we were very much tested, and it was pretty brutal. But to be on the other side is very bizarre.
Yeah, we'll come on to that. That all sounds like a lot of hard work.
Yeah.
Was there ever a moment where you were like, hang on, is this worth it?
Oh my God, there were so many moments. I think never a serious one where I genuinely considered like throwing it all. I went through so many injuries, and actually thinking back to the whole Olympic thing, I was so fucked by the time we got close to the games. And it's the first competition I think I did in my professional career where I genuinely went in to participate, not to compete. And there's such a big difference there. And ironically, if I'd gone in to compete, I probably could have made finals and done better. But I just was so exhausted by the time we got there that it was almost about getting off the ground and becoming an Olympian to make it all worth it, as opposed to try and finish wherever it might have been that the goal was previously. And there's many reasons for that. But yeah, I remember like saying out loud to Leah, like, I've got one more comeback in me and then I am done. Like, I'm not going to climb anymore after that. And I remember feeling that.
Wait, what do you mean? What, one more comeback? What was that comeback?
Like, from injury.
Right.
Because
Okay.
I'd come back from a broken leg. I'd come back from shoulder surgery. I'd had 2 knee surgeries at this point. I'd had a wrist surgery. I'd had all these finger injuries, and I was dealing with like more injuries. And
why do you have a sense of like why you think you've been plagued more with injuries than other climbers?
I think there's many aspects I don't know. Ultimately, I don't know for sure. I struggled with like disordered eating in my teens, and that's ultimately why I broke my leg in the first place, which was my first kind of big injury when I was 18, I think it was, which ironically that sparked my entire professional career and outlook. So that's
Go on, tell how.
Because I basically broke my leg 2 weeks after deferring all of my university applications, and decided to try and be a pro climber, and then broke my leg. So was sat at home watching the London Olympics, and that's what made me think I could be an athlete and a climber. Like, I could look like Jess Ennis and be absolutely jacked out my mind and train like I'm training to do the heptathlon at the Olympics, but for climbing. And that just didn't exist in my world at the time. So that's where I kind of sparked the idea that I didn't want to sleep in caves. I wanted to train and eat and sleep and like use everything at my disposal. Or not at my disposal, because it wasn't there at that time. I had to go find it, to be a professional athlete, not a professional climber, which felt really different. But so breaking my leg is what sparked me to get a coach, work with a nutritionist, to figure out how to be healthy. Because at that time in comp climbing, there were so many successful female climbers and male climbers that were very light. And ultimately, that's the the path that I saw to success was I need to
Mm.
be lighter. So watching the Olympics and seeing strong athletes, I was like, oh, they're not light. And yeah, they're not climbers, but it kind of sparked this curiosity as to whether or not I could be, train like an athlete, eat like an athlete, sleep, do everything to kind of get to this goal that seems so unattainable. Um, but that's what made me start working with a coach and nutritionist. That's where I started.
Okay, yeah. So to close the loop on that, you said that I originally asked you, um, I originally asked you why do you think you were injured more than others, and you
Ah,
said in
yeah.
your past you had disordered eating. Do you think there's a hangover from that?
Yeah, I don't that's kind of maybe one aspect. I think that I also worked with a coach who'd never coached climbing before. So in terms of experience, we were both kind of figuring it out as we went along. I don't know if I was predisposed to have more injuries, if I overtrained, if it was from kind of not eating enough in my teens. Um, yeah, I think there's so many different reasons. Maybe it's my mindset as well to push too hard and to push into that space. Although I've always thought that trying hard was one of my biggest weaknesses. um, but yeah, I don't know is the answer, but
Yeah.
it's like now I kind of don't find coming back from injury very hard, but during the Olympics and leading up to the competing at the Tokyo Olympics, I was so over doing comebacks. And I
Mhm.
knew I wanted to have a baby as well if I could. So I knew that there was another comeback to go, like probably
Yeah.
the hardest one. So that was always in the back of my mind. But since Frank had double knee surgery, shoulder surgery, and all sorts, and it doesn't feel hard to come back after having a baby. I'm like, oh, okay, it's just part of the
Wow.
process.
That's wild. um, let's just go back to the Olympics briefly. So I watched you on TV. um, and I was like, oh my God, she looks like she's having such a great time. She's so positive. She just looks like I could tell that you had a completely different mindset from everyone else that was there.
Yeah, I
You,
feel that too.
yeah. And you just said, had you gone in with a different mindset, maybe you would have qualified. Do you want to just talk a little bit more about like what those two different mindsets look like? Because on some level, having a sort of positive, relaxed, I'm just here to participate, I don't have expectations, can serve some people at some times, right? Because
Yeah.
like the extreme of that is like I have to win, pile on the anxiety and the pressure kind of
Yeah.
thing. So just talk us through like your optimal mindset for like what that looks like for you when you're like it's game time, and then what
Mhm.
it looked like at the Olympics.
I think it's a massive spectrum of kind of different approaches. And obviously you've got the two extreme ends. And I think that I've been at both, and both are not conducive to um, kind of the best possible performance. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and I will admit that I don't think I gave my best possible performance at the Olympics. And I don't think I did when I was going into comps to try and win. And I
Mm-hmm.
often see, like some kids doing well in comps now, and they might win a youth comp or kind of do well at an event, and I'm so happy for them, but it also breaks my heart a little bit because then the magic's gone from trying to like chase that kind of first gold medal, and trying to stay at the top is so much harder than get there, and getting there is so hard. Um, and that's the only time that you actually go into that mindset of like, I'm going in to win, which again can be really useful, but also not at times. I think for me, when I was doing well at comps, I was going in entirely content with where I was at physically and mentally. And I felt comfortable and ready and really focused on my own performance and not the externals. Um, and I do think we managed to get that for kind of a number of events and maybe a season or so. Um, but it's so hard to find, and everything's always changing, the circumstances, and you just don't know what's going on with people in their own lives as well, because obviously all of that impacts performance. And I think when we talk about elite sport, we focus on events and we focus on kind of what it takes to be in that space there. And then you think about what's going on in your own life and all the external stuff. And every elite athlete has all of that too. So yeah, I think many different kind of mindsets have worked for me throughout my career. But I find it so fascinating what actually is conducive to a good performance. And I don't always think that that's conducive to a happy athlete. So then you're kind of, and you know, so many athletes are like, I had so much fun. That was so great. I really enjoy competing. But you don't hear them say that when they kind of don't do well or if they're not achieving their goals. And I'm like, do you enjoy competing or do you enjoy kind of ticking your goals off? Or winning, yeah, whatever that looks like, making finals, making podium, winning. And then when you do win, is that going to shift in terms of where you hold your self-worth? And I think for me, I've always been very conscious to try and keep my self-worth attached from those results, like I said. But that's so hard to do.
Yeah, I think that's sort of like the real, I mean, that's what I see in the work that I do, is that if an athlete has got like a stable sense of self-worth, irrespective of how their performance is, that is conducive to long-term performance. But it's when an athlete will hinge too much self-worth on these outcomes that are actually out of their control, because especially in competitions, you don't know, how everyone else is going to show up.
Kind of a problem with the system as well, though. You know, for the Olympics, I had a medal support plan, it was called. So I was basically funded as a medal hope. And then, you know, you walk into different environments in kind of the Olympic sphere and it's like, oh, are you on the medal support plan? Go over here. Oh, you're not? You go over here. And it's like, whoa, okay. Like you're kind of treated differently. It's seen so different. And in terms of if the Olympics had happened in 2020, I feel like it would have been a different story for me because I felt ready in 2020 and I really didn't in 2021. And that's not to say I would have gone in and won a medal. I never said I was going in to win a medal. I never said I was going in to try and kind of, I was going to do something. Like I just didn't have that bravado about me or that outlook. And I think that's because I was so focused on my performance and I was always wanting to give a performance that was worthy of a medal next to other people's. But yeah, so for me to kind of have that experience, and I think there's been a shift in the system currently. I'm not sure if medal support plans still a thing, but kind of we put those expectations on ourselves, but then so do the systems in place that support us. So I think that it's really hard to disconnect from that, even if you're really strong and confident in your own mind.
Yeah. You said something just now that you were basically like along the lines of like the best performances aren't always going hand in hand with happy athletes. Do you think it's kind of impossible to sort of like be the absolute best athlete that you can be, just like totally optimizing all of that and be a content, happy person with good well-being? Like, is that possible?
Yeah, I think that's definitely possible. I think
Do you
it's
see it?
I don't know if I see it, and I don't know how long it'd last.
How much did you experience that yourself?
It's so funny because you always look back with like a jaded view, hey, and to be able to have the privilege to kind of think back like, oh, those times were great. And I actually journaled a lot throughout my time on the comp circuit, and I reread some bits of a few years ago now. And I was like, wow, I was in such a different headspace to what I think I was and what the images portray. And throughout a lot of my career, there was always so much drama in different avenues of my life that even if I was content and happy, then my mind would be kind of curious or kind of worried about something else. I feel like it definitely prepared me for parenthood in some ways. But I think there have been times where I've been content and happy, and I think I had to work really hard for that. And I'd say that I'm there now, and I feel like my happiness and contentment, because I feel like they are two very different things, are detached from my performance. And that's something I struggled with coming back postpartum again. But I also don't feel like that's inevitable. I don't feel like that's going to kind of remain the case. I think it's always going to be something that I personally have to work on, and that I know I'm always going to have certain challenges in my life to navigate. So I don't kind of walk through life expecting to always be happy and content and be meeting my goals professionally, because it just doesn't feel realistic. And maybe it is for some people, and I'd love to know what goes on in these people's lives to make that possible. But yeah, I think it can happen, but I don't know if it can happen for like an entire career, maybe. I don't know. Especially not in climbing. We don't make enough money to be content and happy.
All right, so I'll use this as a segue. There's maybe more we can talk about the whole comp mindset thing, but I wanted to segue to something you put on social media recently. Along these lines. Can I quote what you said?
Yeah, of course. It's out
You,
there. You quote
yeah.
away.
So you said, I struggle with my mental health sometimes. I had disordered eating when I was younger. I have panic attacks, and there are times when I need to take anxiety medication. My husband has had a brutal journey with depression. Oh, and I've never spoken about any of this online until now. So like, you just said then, like, there's some people who seem to just have it all together. They seem to be content and they seem to be successful. Like, how is that possible? But for many people, you're that person. Like, it's like you do have this, this, I want to say image. That sounds like it's fake though, because I don't think it is. But you come across as very professional. You're hardworking. You're positive. You're kind of like a boss babe too. Like you seem to like to be doing really well from like a career perspective, which are not a lot of professional athletes actually manage to do.
Yeah.
They may be really good climbers, but they haven't been able to make a career out of it. So, we're not seeing that struggle from the outside. And then the caption to that to
Yeah.
that post that I just read out kind of mentioned that, right? That people were surprised when you said that there was kind of more going on under the surface. So yeah, tell us about that.
Yeah. I mean, I could talk about mental health all day. And I think for me, it's been something that's been so prevalent in my life for a long time. And every year kind of like mental health awareness week comes around, and I think I wish I could share. I wish I felt strong enough to share. And the people within my sphere and my team that I went to the Olympics with, and the people I work with are all aware of like my own personal struggles, and I share a lot to them about Ned's struggles too, my husband, because that directly impacts me, of course, and where I'm at. And I think I've never felt like there's been a time, place, or space to talk about it publicly. And I try hard to, I show a lot of fails on Instagram. I talk about the bad days. I talk about going for a smear test. I talk about being on my period. Like I try as hard as I can to be as real as I can be. But of course, there's a limit to that. And I'm very much see like my brand and my social media as like one, like as work, and that's like one aspect of my life, and I hold parts of my life back for kind of my private space. And Ned, my husband, he's been very strong to encourage that, because he's quite a quiet person. He's not someone who likes to shout about what he's doing, and he's kind of very much happy to be in the background and not be involved in conversations very much. And I'm trying to get him to start a podcast with me, actually, because he's got so much interesting stuff to say. So I'll keep working on it. But
Will you come on this podcast?
maybe I'll ask. But for us, it's been a real battle to get to that point, and it, in my early years of competing, Ned, or when we first got together, so Ned and I started dating. I think I was like maybe almost 19, 18, 19. So it's been a long time we've been together. And he was really struggling with depression at the time. And he won't mind me saying, and it's again been something that he's wanted to communicate more about as well, because he wants to help people and he's had help on his journey. But when we got together, I genuinely didn't know if Ned was going to be around that long because he was in such a bad place. And when we were both competing, it didn't work because we didn't have the capacity to compete and push ourselves and kind of look after each other and be in a relationship. So he actually stopped competing so that I could pursue my comp goals, which I don't think I've ever talked about publicly. And for us, that was what worked. And every single time I left to go on a World Cup trip, every time I left, I was terrified to leave him. And but I also couldn't perform if he came to events because I couldn't compartmentalize. I couldn't kind of not worry about him, and I couldn't take my brain out of the space of being kind of the partner to someone that's suffering. And we've been through a whole journey to kind of get to him being okay and to even get to him being happy on some days. And I think that kind of obviously had an impact on my own mental health, but that my own mental health is totally separate to that too, in terms of the struggles that I've had. And I had panic attacks a little bit throughout kind of my younger life, but then they got way more severe around COVID actually, which kind of sparked a whole new situation for us to deal with. And it kind of really had to shift from like me helping Ned to the other way around. And he's been incredibly supportive of me throughout my entire career. Like there's no doubt that I wouldn't be where I am now without him, for sure. Like I'm so proud of what we've done together and kind of the battles and kind of what we've faced together as well, but from both sides. But for my journey, it really struck me because one of our really good friends started to struggle with anxiety and they had some big presentations to do at work. And I said, I use medication for anxiety. Sometimes I even need to take anxiety medication to go to a supermarket because I get way too anxious. Weirdly, I don't know what it is about supermarkets, but they sometimes really trigger me. And I'm someone who is quite happy to stand up in front of thousands of people and chat, and like that doesn't make me anxious at all, but going to a supermarket does. And I have worked with different people to kind of combat this and navigate this, and many different techniques along the way. And interestingly, it's not something I ever struggled with in terms of performance for competitive climbing. Like that was a space where I felt absolutely fine. But yeah, recently I was asked by the Climbing Hanger, we're going to do some posts on Mental Health Awareness Week. Like we really want our spaces to be places that can help people. If you have any ideas for a post, then do let us know. And I was like, do you know what? I do. And actually it's nothing to do with the Climbing Hanger. It's to do with me. And I was like, I'm going to share this and send it to them. And they were like, whoa, okay. That's amazing. Like, this is not our space. And I was like, yeah, I know, but I've had this in my head for so long that it feels like actually they gave me kind of like nudge that I needed to want to share it and to feel like it was the right time and it was okay to do it. So yeah, a big kind of thanks to them for raising awareness about all of this as well. But there's so much more that I want to talk about and that Ned wants to talk about too, which is again why I want to start a space where we can. But for us, climbing has been kind of a source for many different things in a space that we feel like we can express ourselves away from all of that, but also been part of the turmoil as well. Because like I said, like for me, traveling and going to comps in my early years of my career, my most successful years were probably some of the hardest years of our lives in terms of his mental health. It's the reason I got a dog, actually, because I was so scared to leave him on his own. I was like, here's a dog. He was like, I don't want a dog. I was like, well, you've got one now. Um,
Amazing.
but yeah, it's not been easy. And I think that, Ned's not someone who naturally shares this, but he's been kind of a huge source of support for some of his closest friends recently. And the more he opens up about it, the more people start to say, me too, or how do you deal with this? Or I'm going through this. And, a few people reached out to him after I wrote that post because I had no idea you suffered from depression. And it's been almost nice that he can now kind of pass on what he's learned in some ways. But yeah, I mean, we'll never not be dealing with it. Like it's part of our lives forever. And I knew that from like the first like date that Ned and I had. I was like, oh, I'm either with this guy forever or I need to get out right now because he would not
Wow.
like this is not gonna work if I peace out at some point. So yeah, I was like, cool, guess I'm gonna marry this guy, right? Okay. Which is funny.
How did you like commit to that? Like how did you know you were sure? Was it a feeling? Was it a thinking thing?
It was a commitment to kind of something way beyond like whether or not it like I knew for a fact that he would go above and beyond to support me and to love me and be comfortable and make me comfortable and happy, whatever that meant. But I it felt like a commitment to his mental health. And I don't mean that to sound like weird or not romantic or like I didn't like him. I adored him and I still do. He will always be my favorite person to go climbing with and to have a coffee with and to hang out with. Like, there's no one else I'd put above him to kind of make a space that I feel great in. But it was just really clear from very early that it wouldn't be okay for us to break up. And I was like, okay, like I just was very committed to kind of the journey that we were going on, as opposed to like him and our relationship. I knew that I'd have to figure that out, and that might not be clear, but it almost had to come second to his mental health from day one, which is a
Wow.
different start to a relationship and
Yeah.
not something that anyone knows about us. Um, and I called my dad and I was like, Dad, I'm seeing this guy and this is the situation. I talked to my dad about everything. Like my dad, I'm so impressed with the fact that I could call him up and say, like, I could call him up and be like, Dad, I murdered someone. He'd be like, okay, what are we doing? Are we digging a hole or going to the police? Like, what do you want to do?
Wow. That's
There would be
amazing.
there's never an ounce of judgment. And I rang him and I was like, he is in a bad place. He wants to make this work and I want to make it work. And like, if I am all in on this, it's going to be really hard. And we just had a conversation about it and talked about different things. And my dad opened up about a whole host of mental health problems he'd had when he was younger that I didn't know about. And he was like, I'll support you to support him, whatever we need to do. Like, if you feel like you can give like as much as he needs, then like why, and you want to, then that's like great. But like, don't, this is a big deal. So I did know from pretty early on, or like from day one, that it was a pretty big commitment. And
Wow.
we went through it. Like if I were ever to write a book, it'd probably be called like Married to Depression, because it is so much more a part of my life than all the comps that I've won and everything we've done. To be sat here now and be like, my husband is happy most days and like can be happy. Like that took years for him to even imagine being happy, let alone be happy. And then
Wow.
to like see him with our daughter and to see the life we've built, gosh, that is like way more of an achievement than any comp or going to the Olympics or any hard climb I've ever done. So yeah, it's been a journey.
Wow, that's amazing. Thanks for sharing that. Um, did you ever have to choose between Ned and competition? Did it ever like come up that it was like a stark choice like that?
I never felt that. And I think that's because he gave up comps to support me in my comp career. Um,
How did that decision happen? Like, how was that a conversation at like 10 p.m.? Or like...
Yeah, I remember we had a full-on conversation about it.
How come not both pursue that? Like, why did it feel like it had to be a choice?
It felt like it was too much in terms of trying to, I don't want to say deal with his mental health, but, like improve his mental health. And the kind of turmoil and the drama around kind of trying to compete and do well. Like if he didn't do well, that would have an impact on his mental health, which would have an impact on me, which would have an impact on my performance. So there was just so many elements to juggle. And I was like, I can't do this. Like either, and I would have quit, like I would have quit comps to support him. But he was like, I've had longer competing. You're clearly going to be a lot better than me. This isn't working for us to do it together. And we both made finals at a World Cup together. And like we've both been kind of at the top of the sport. Well, I guess him not quite as high as me, but he didn't feel like he could have been, whereas he saw that I could be, and he believed in me way more than I did. And I had my goals and I was keen to try and achieve them, but he was like, you are going to do this, like you can do this and I can support you to do that. He always wanted to rock climb at some point, kind of in the same way that I have, but yeah, he just chose to shift to focus on that and his mental health and supporting me so that we could make it work. So it's quite a big sacrifice on his side. And yeah, it's so long ago now. I don't really remember what the conversation was, but it was hard. Like we would have like the toughest of conversations, and I would cry a lot, and it would be like very intense. And the first many years of our relationship were intense from a communication and like health perspective.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Do you feel like your climbing still takes priority over his, or does it feel more balanced now that you don't compete?
Well, it's different now. So Ned has also recently been through like a 2-3 year health battle with like celiac disease. So we actually haven't got a test. His brother got diagnosed with celiac, having had all the same issues. And then Ned stopped eating gluten and is now fine. But he basically had 2 years where he didn't really climb. So there's so much that's gone on in our lives, honestly. And this all came just before I gave birth. So when Frankie was born, Ned couldn't even do poppers on, like her clothes. He couldn't really change her because his hands were so swollen and so painful.
Wow.
What he was going through. So now I'd say our climbing, it feels like 50-50 in terms of who takes priority, because he's kind of coming back. It's been about 6 months and he literally changed overnight. He's back climbing like multiple 8B pluses in a week. He'll like come back from the crag and have done a ton of stuff, and he can train and he has energy again and enthusiasm for the sport. But yeah, he quit climbing like 3 times in the last 3 years.
Wow. Let's go back to mental health a little bit. In this world where you kind of have to share, some of your life to kind of be honest and, not like portray an image that isn't fake, and have people connect with you, which is probably important for you on a personal level, but also important for your career as well.
Yeah.
And you felt like you've not been able to share this stuff around your mental health. What do you think was like the biggest fear behind deciding not to share it? Is it to do with the stigma that's still attached to mental health, or was it that you felt that for your own well-being, it was important for you to keep some of your life private, or, that much of it private?
There's parts of both. And although I'm very open with my dad, like talking about mental health with my sisters, for example, has never been something that we do. And that's not to say it wouldn't be okay if I did. But it's just not kind of in everyday conversations in my family or in Ned's family. And I think so much of it was Ned's journey too, that he's never, until recently, never been comfortable with sharing, full stop. Everyone thinks he's kind of this grumpy, like unfriendly guy because he doesn't like communicating with the world, but he, in actual fact, that's so far from the truth. It's just he doesn't, if you're in his bubble, then that's fine. If you're out, then he's just kind of awkward. But I think so. I think there's elements of that. And then in kind of early processing of my own mental health and of where he was at, I just wasn't in a space to share because I didn't know what I was sharing. I didn't know what we were going through. And then I guess that's just kind of become the norm, is that that's something that's in that like private space box that we're navigating. And it's always felt like something that we are trying to get through, as opposed to something that we're through and can reflect on. And I think that will always be the case. Like we're never going to be through Ned's depression. We're never going to be kind of on the other side of me struggling with anxiety, or maybe we will, but it will always be kind of part of us reflecting on ourselves where we're at. So it just never felt natural to talk about. And also, no one ever asked me about it. It wasn't a case of like, hey, how's your mental health today? That's not a question we ask people, but people are like, oh, how's your physical health? That's a totally normal question to ask an athlete. Like, are you injured? Do you have any niggles? Like, how's your recovery from shoulder surgery? No one says like, oh, how's your recovery from like depression? Like, it's not a topic that naturally comes up. So it just never felt like I could. And I think when the hanger said, do you want to post about this? I was like, no one's ever said that. No one's ever said, we're doing this. Do you want to be involved? Or how about being in this space? Or not at a time where I actually thought, yeah, I can. Maybe they have in the past. And I'm like, no, that's in the no box. But yeah, I'm not really sure what kind of sparked it into a conversation that I was happy to have now. I think ultimately just having the headspace, and for like Ned and me to both be in a strong space to do that. Because although I think it could be useful to share when you're low or share when you need help, never felt like I needed any extra external help. I'm not seeking help by sharing this. I'm just trying to create awareness. And I really struggle as well with the slogan, it's okay not to be okay, because I was like, I don't know, I've lived with someone and seen what it's like to not be okay, and that was not okay. Like, it was really not okay. And I think I've always like had a conflict with that saying.
But maybe the sort of the core of the saying is more that the way we talk about, like when someone says, "Are you okay?" There is the social pressure, isn't there, to be like, yeah, I'm good. There's in general like positivity, and the image of I have my shit together is more attractive than the image of like shit's hard right now and I'm not doing very well.
Yeah.
And
I think it's almost, like it's totally fine to say like I'm not doing all right. And I totally get why, but I almost feel like the slogan for mental health, it's okay not to be okay, is really like triggered me.
Right,
and kind of made me feel like I didn't know, because as well I knew that if I shared the fact that I don't think it's okay not to be okay, then I'd have to have like conversations like this, which I'm fine to do now, but I don't think I would have been previously. I think I would have been like, oh, I don't know how to explain myself, and I don't know how to say all this without the backstory of what we've been through. And I was really nervous to share about my own experiences with mental health, because for me, having panic attacks and dealing with a bit of anxiety feels so trivial compared to what Ned's been through.
But externally, other people might be kind of shocked by that.
Yeah. So then I was like, well, actually, is it a good thing to share? Is it not? Am I trying? And I do get nervous as well with the whole like, oh, you're just trying to like attention seek, and like the kind of the haters online who I would love to say don't get to me, but I'm human, like they do. So I think it's always been something I've been waiting to feel strong enough to communicate about. And actually for Ned to be in a space where he's happy for me to share about his experience too, and he wants to share about that, because I think without context, it's really hard to actually understand like where we're at and what I'm actually trying to say. And the fact that I'm not just there going, oh yeah, I get a bit stressed sometimes. And I'm like, no, it's not just that. Like,
And also, Instagram's often not the place for that, is it? Because it's just you've got to include too much information.
Yeah.
How do you feel, with that anxiety now? Do you feel like have you had a kind of diagnosis? Is this something that happens occasionally, or is this something that for you is like an ongoing, like day-to-day thing to manage?
It's not day to day. I have periods where it's harder and where it isn't. And when I got my cycle back, so my periods back after Frankie, it's definitely attached to my menstrual cycle for sure.
Yeah.
My PMS week, I'm way more anxious. I get headaches. I feel a whole host of different things I never feel.
Honestly, one of the reasons I want to keep breastfeeding is because I don't want myself to go back.
I know, right? Yeah,
breastfeeding sucks and there's all these problems around it, but I honestly am loving not having a cycle.
I know there's so many benefits to breastfeeding that I loved. But yeah, I ultimately got too exhausted. And some people get it back when they are breastfeeding too. But for me, it's because I took the birth control pill for almost the entire time I was competing. I only stopped taking that in 2020. So I didn't have periods. I purposely took a pill that was birth control. It stopped my periods and it worked great for me. And it was just kind of what was done at the time. And again, that's a very different conversation than for right now. But it's almost like I had to learn, I'm having to learn what my cycle is, how my hormones are impacted, and all the kind of negative, I want to say, impacts. So I track everything now. So I have to be way more on it with my schedule and my social encounters and many different things during my PMS week. So that 1 week is for me like the most like at risk I am for anxiety. And then I just have medication that actually I just have it on me a lot of the time. And even knowing I have that to take if I need it, it's just beta blockers. I'm not on anything else. I don't struggle with depression. I've had kind of some low times in my life, but I've never been diagnosed with depression. I've never felt like I struggled with that. I want to say just anxiety, but I know that that's not the right word to use. But yeah, and then I get panic attacks sometimes, and that's not.
Do you feel warning signs before you get those? Are there things that you've kind of learned that, say someone's listening now who's just realized, okay, maybe I'm struggling with anxiety too. Is there something that you can pass on to them that's helped?
For me, the biggest one is communication. So whoever that is to will differ for people, for every individual, right? But for me, being able to communicate with Ned, like, this is how I feel right now. And then I also started to log my emotions and like where I was at to see if I could kind of see any patterns. But it's been different for a lot of different stages of my life. And I think that it's hard to say what has been consistent and what I know triggers it. Like for me now, if I drink too much alcohol, then I have way more anxiety and I often will have a panic attack that evening. So I'm just very conscious to not drink too much alcohol. Like that's totally new. That never happened in my 20s, Like I never had a panic attack from drinking. Whereas now it's like actually no, my late 20s, but not in my early 20s. But yeah, so that's something that I just don't do and I'm quite content with that. And I think for me, my panic attacks will never happen in public. And I think that almost if I feel like I'm getting anxious, then I almost need to take myself away from being in crowded spaces so that I can kind of process that as opposed to like press it down and then deal with it later. Because that's usually when I'll have a panic attack if I've kind of been through the whole day feeling anxious, holding it in. And then it's like I get into bed that night and I'm like, uh-oh, like I know I'm about to have a panic attack. And they look different from time to time. but there's kind of inconsistencies within that. But the biggest thing for me in that time and that space is to be like, Ned, this is happening. And he always steps up and is kind of the support that I need right there and then. And it'll
And
be,
what does he do to help you kind of manage it in that moment?
he'll just do breathing techniques with me and kind of ask what my needs are in that moment. So sometimes it might be that I need to talk about something, or it might be that total opposite. And he's very good at communicating. We're really good at communicating. Ned and I have actually never had an argument. He's literally never annoyed me. Like, we just don't argue. We just communicate about everything because we've had to. So just figuring out what my needs are in that moment, whether it is to be held or to be left alone or to lie down or to get a cold flannel to put on my head or to lie on the bathroom floor or for him to just take Frankie. It always happens when she's asleep as well. Like, it's like my body will suppress it all until I know I'm in a safe place to panic. The irony. But yeah, he just figures out what my needs are better than I know how to do it.
And how do you sort of like identify with it? Because, you know, I've done a lot of sort of thinking and research around mental health, and there's different lenses to look at mental health, right? There's the sort of like human lens of like, this anxiety like suppressed emotions from something that's out of alignment in my life, or maybe this anxiety is purely physiological, like there's something with particular people's brains, and there's
Yeah.
whole avenues of research is into that, right?
Yeah.
Or is it like part of community and your social need? There's all these different lenses by which we can either study mental health but also think about it on a personal level.
Yeah.
And how do you connect with it in any of those ways, if you do?
I think through every lens, because I think that there is the fact that, there's chemical imbalances in your brain and you can take medication to help with depression. Like, that's a fact, like that's proven, and like medication exists and it helps people. And
Some
I think,
people, yeah.
yeah, some people. And I think there's so much stigma around that, and that's so unfortunate. And trust me, like, Ned and I have been through all of that stigma. And he is on medication. He's been on different medications, and we've worked hard to get to a point where his medication is at the right level so that he can kind of do the things he wants to do in his life as well, because obviously there's side effects. And then for my own kind of journey of being naive and reluctant to take anxiety medication, but and then to speak to many friends about, like, you can take medication to help with this, like, that's okay. And I think that that's not something that is kind of commonly accepted yet in a lot of spaces. Maybe it is in some, but then it's only natural to wonder, like, what led me to this point to kind of make me this way. Both for Ned, for me, for friends, that everybody kind of questions how they are, I think, in terms of with their mental health and why. Wait, like, my daughter's favorite word at the minute is why. We're naturally inclined to question, and I'm fascinated by the fact that there are these different lenses, and I almost want to like blur them all into one to try and see the bigger picture. But of course, we have to separate it out to see the bigger picture, and then it feels like we stop drawing the connections between all three, because ultimately all of these lenses are required to kind of help us with growth and development, and to get to that positive place, or to make steps towards being more positive. And for me, that's been very, you said earlier, like, you're seen as a positive person, and I am, and it's a very conscious choice, and it's something I did from a very early age. My mum moved away when I was really young, and she left for 10 years, and it kind of created this childhood trauma for me, that triggered me into deciding if I was going to be a positive person or not. And I genuinely decided as a kid, like, I'm going to choose to be positive. And I make that choice every single day. Like, I make the choice to every time my daughter comes and interrupts me, I look at her with a smile and say, I just need a minute. But she sees a smile turn to her, like I make many choices in my day that lead to me being positive. And sometimes that's exhausting and sometimes it's easier. But again, there's different lenses to look at that through. So I don't think I spend much time kind of separating those lenses out. I wish I had time to do that though. It's fascinating.
But what I'm really struck by is that those different lenses, I think, come with different degrees of responsibility on the individual. And
Yes.
so, like the physiological sort of lens to look at mental health comes with the sort of like less personal responsibility, which has pros and cons, right? The
Yeah.
pro is that the person doesn't feel bad because they're not like, well, it's my fault that I have a mental health problem, right? It's not my fault. It's how my brain works, and I take the meds for it.
Yeah.
But there's a problem because there's obviously some things you could probably do to help, and you've listed some of them, right? You've said that you track your cycle and you're mindful of stressors and these different things that you've mentioned. Um, so yeah, I mean, do you see it in that way? Like, do you see? I mean, it also sounds like you feel like you have this personal responsibility to be positive. You've made a choice. You say you're making that choice every day. So yeah, I mean, is that the message that you would like people to take away potentially, or do you also see the dangers in that?
Well, I see the dangers in that for sure. And I think it only works if you have a safe space to kind of be brutally honest. And I have that, and I have that in Ned now. I'd say I didn't in the past because he wasn't strong enough, and that's probably where I struggled the most to navigate kind of my own journey, is when I've not had that outlet, and my dad's been that support for me for many years. But I think my like, if I could give people a takeaway, it wouldn't be to choose to be positive, because that works for me. I know that works for me, and that, like, I know how far I can push that, and when I need to pull back and withdraw and actually be like, I'm not being positive right now. Like, I just need to cry and have that space to do so, either on my own or with Ned or whatever it might be. But what I would say is that being as honest as you can be with yourself first is the biggest takeaway from my journey throughout all of this. And I think, regardless of supporting Ned or kind of what I've tried to achieve within my career or within parenthood, if I'm not honest with myself, then I get really kind of torn from the path that I want to be on, and I get really confused. And then it perpetuates a whole cycle of different emotions that are often negative, because I don't feel true to my values and my self worth because I'm not being honest. But obviously, to be honest requires a huge degree of vulnerability, and that's hard to do. But until we're able to be honest with ourselves, we're not going to be able to do it with other people. And like, I really value communication, and I think that is the fundamental pillar of building any good relationship, whether it's professional, personal, whatever it might be. But you can't kind of expect communication to work until you're honest with yourself. So, kind of turning, looking inwards and turning inwards and actually starting to break down how I feel, and whether that's doing that with a therapist or with a friend or just on your own. Because some people don't have the skill set to do that. Like, they don't have the ability to actually think, how do I feel? Where am I at? Because in life, I said it earlier talking about something else, but we can't change our emotions. We can't change how we feel. We can act to change how we feel in the future. And I think we need to make those steps and do those actions to feel differently and to make change happen. But until we can actually be honest with how we feel, then we don't know what we need to do to act to feel differently. So,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've done a lot of soul searching over the years, and I think that now I'm really good at being very frank about where I'm at, and I don't hide how I'm feeling around Ned, and I think that's shown in the fact that we've literally never even bickered, let alone had an argument. Like, it's very blunt, and I know how to explain my needs, and trying to win World Cups and doing so for multiple years and going to the Olympics, there was, like I said again earlier, there was no room for kind of waffy kind of figuring it out as we go along. It was like, this is the way we're going and we're doing it and we're kind of charging through. So I was kind of stripped of the luxury of not being blunt. Like I had to be as blunt as I could be with my entire team. And that was scary, and it was not always easy, but it was so important, and I think it's allowed me to do that now. But yeah, I would say the biggest takeaway for me isn't choosing to be positive, it's choosing to be honest with yourself.
That's really powerful. Thanks for that. So we said we'd finish at 12. Do you have any more time for me to ask a few more?
Yeah, sure, go for it.
So the thing is that the things I still want to ask you are like quite big topics.
Okay, well, I'll try and be quick. I'll stop giving long answers.
No, I mean, honestly, if we ended the podcast there, it's already been so amazing. So no pressure at all if you want to go. But I just wanted to talk a little bit about two topics. One, it relates to mental health, and it's something that really affects our community, and that's eating disorders and being underweight.
Yeah.
Where do you feel like we're at with that as a community? Like, what's your kind of take being kind of in the inside? Because how I feel is that there's lots of conversations about it, but I don't really see the needle moving in the sense that
Yeah.
I feel like I see a lot of competitors who are clearly underweight or outdoor athletes as well.
Yeah. I mean, I've been in the sport so long, and I've been the comp kid that kind of idolizes the lighter athletes and wants to be there, and I've suffered because of it. So I mean, it's incredibly personal to me, this topic, and it upsets me that our sport doesn't seem to have moved on. In terms of what actions have been taken, so climbing is the first sport to put in place a health screening that can remove athletes from competition. The first ever sport to do that.
Wow.
So in terms of what the IFSC, the International Federation of Sport Climbing, are doing, they are taking steps. And what I think the issue is that the communication isn't very good about what is happening, because an athlete can only be removed from competition if they are at risk of death in that moment. So they can't be removed from competition if they are kind of anywhere else on the scale. So I currently sit as the president of the Athlete Commission for the International Federation of Sport Climbing. So I'm an executive board member. And the IFSC have 2 athletes on their board with voting rights, which again is very unusual. And I do think there's a lot that the sport can do better. And I do think there's way more steps that we can take. But in terms of the needle moving, I think it is starting. And this has been the process that has to happen for any change to be enacted. What I worry about is that the more our sport grows, the more kind of the Olympics becomes the center of the competition world, the less healthy we could end up as a sport. And ultimately, elite sport isn't healthy.
Yeah. So at what point do you think this is just like something we have to accept about elite sport? Because it's not like other sports are really any better. I mean, obviously, when you have a weight sensitive sport like climbing, maybe things are going to be worse, but other sports are like that too.
So my honest answer, I don't know what we do to make it better. But what I think we need to change the narrative of is that we are looking at the athletes that are in the sport right now that we are concerned about. And what I said, and I've said this to the IFSC, is it's beyond that. We're looking at the little kids like I was that it's having an impact on. We're looking at the men and women of any age or people of any age that actually the image of our sport is impacting, that we have a responsibility to our community. And I've said this publicly and in board meetings, that right now in our sport, we are saying we are testing athletes and we will remove athletes in extreme cases. So I was like, we're saying now one of two things: either we don't have any athletes who are deemed to be in that extreme case and deemed unhealthy, or we're saying our test doesn't work. So which one are we saying? And it's the former, because we have no athletes who we can remove from competition who are at risk of death in that moment. But that's not how it's been communicated. So it's almost like, oh, we're testing athletes and everyone's fine. And I'm like, that's not the case, because if they hit on this scale, so it's a scale of kind of green, yellow, orange, red. And if they're in the orange red zone, then they will have a letter sent to the national federation. The responsibility always falls back to national federations in terms of athlete health and well-being, which is the problem, right? Because they're the ones who want the results at times. So it's this kind of, it's a really complicated, complex kind of beast to figure out. And there's been people, the medical commission right now, who are working to kind of make this even better, are incredible. They're an amazing bunch of individuals, professionals who are in it because they care. And I think that, again, it comes down to communications of, we're not hearing about the work that they're doing. We're not hearing about why this is the case, the fact that athletes aren't being removed, but some athletes are being reported. We're not hearing about how many tests are being done. We're not hearing that this happens at every single competition, and that a health screening has to be done by a national federation beforehand. The national federation has to sign the athletes off as healthy. The responsibility is on them ultimately. So unless you're like really inside, you don't know all of the nuance to this. But my kind of argument against that is why? Like, why aren't we sharing this? Why aren't we making this kind of public? Like, we don't need to say we're testing this athlete, this athlete, this athlete. We just can talk about the fact that there is steps towards trying to create a space that's healthier and has the athlete well-being kind of at the center. But in terms of the broader picture outside of competition, you know, we're a power to weight sport, and this has been an issue since the first day I stepped in a climbing wall. You know, like everyone has always talked about weight, and I don't know what the answer is. I don't, you know, especially like outdoors, there's no one body that kind of could have any impact on that. And I think ultimately creating awareness and knowledge in not only athletes, but parents and coaches, and having that accessible is, to me, the only way that I see we begin to break down some of those kind of lacks of knowledge, because I don't think it's necessarily a barrier. I think it's just the lack of kind of communication around that side of things and what impact that can have. And I think it's hard because, you know, like, especially as a female athlete, this is impacting, it could impact the rest of your life, whether or not you can have a baby and start a family. And like it could impact people's lives, whether they survive or not in extreme cases. So I don't know how we fix it, but I think there's more to be done. And, you know, I've wanted, again, this is something I would love to talk about on social media. I had these like 3 posts in my notes right now on my phone that I've just never kind of felt strong enough to kind of post. And like, one of my good friends has been through a battle with kind of an eating disorder recently, and I didn't feel like the right time to share. And I'm like, is there ever a right time? And what purpose is this actually serving? But the purpose I wanted it to serve was A, awareness, and B, to say, here's a bunch of links with information you can go and seek as a parent, as an athlete, as a coach, because coaches are seeking information on how to get stronger shoulders, how to get less finger injuries, how to rehab fingers. But are they communicating about kind of fueling like what that looks like? I don't know.
Yeah, and I think for me, it's like there's all that knowledge around nutrition and kind of, you know, longevity, but for me, I've got a bias around psychology, obviously, and it it's really kind of the core for me is like, we're putting performance and results above well-being. Like,
Yeah.
until we kind of reconcile that, I think there'll probably be problems. But one thing that can help with that is people seeing athletes like yourself who are very healthy, who look very healthy, and haven't gone down that route of kind of trying to be lighter. You know, you've got it. It seemed obvious to me that you've gone down the route of trying to be stronger. Is that actually the case, or like, is underneath it. Are you an athlete who does think a lot about their weight? And if so, how do you do that in a way that's healthy from a mental and physical perspective?
I mean, I worked with Rebecca Dent, nutritionist, who's based out in Chamonix now. She worked with me throughout a lot of my career and really helped me educate to return to sport after breaking my leg. So when I broke my leg, I think I was 49 kilos, whereas I would compete at 57, 58 by the time I got healthy. For me and the way my brain worked, I needed to understand what fueling was and what I was kind of doing to my body in training to understand what I needed to recover. And if I had a weight that I could drop to, and I knew that at that point I would either get injured or I'd get too fatigued and I wouldn't be able to manage to do the whole World Cup season. I'd always drop weight across the World Cup season. So I'd usually start at 58 and I could drop to 56 minimum. But I've had so many conversations where I've said that weight out loud and guy climbers are like, whoa, you were 58? And I'm like, you are part of the problem. Like you just
Yeah.
like,
Yeah, I weigh 58 kilos. Yeah.
we didn't even think to be like, that's because they're 58 kilos. They're like, well, you're like the same weight as me. I'm like, yeah, that's not really a positive thing to say, but that's normal in our sphere. But I did think about weight and I still do. And my weight has been all over the place, especially with pregnancy. And I put so much weight on in pregnancy, and that was a mental battle for me because I was like, why have I put so much more weight on than everybody else? And I Googled so many times during my pregnancy, like, what is the normal amount of weight gain? And it'd say 12 kilos or something. And I was at 20 kilos weight gain. I was like, what the fuck? Like, this isn't okay. But again, it's just kind of ingrained within me, whether that's through climbing or through society or whatever it is. It's just part of how I think. And I have to consciously choose to process that in whichever way is positive as possible. But yeah, I still consider my weight. And, at the minute I'm trying to lean up a little bit because I want to climb certain climbs outdoors. And I think I'm really scared to say that out loud at the minute because I think we're in a space where it's like, you're strong and you're healthy. I'm like, yeah, but it's actually fine for me to lean up a few kilos. I can't maintain that weight, but I can go from 59 to 57, and for me, that's really healthy. That's really good. I can't go down to 55. That's bad.
But that's what professional athletes do, right? They take that stuff seriously, they optimize, but we have somewhere along the line become bad at that
yeah,
because
really bad at that.
and why is that? Is it because we have these like extreme cases where people can seem to perform to a really high level while being clearly underweight, and we see that visually? Is that kind of what's going on, and then that influences our decisions?
I mean, I don't know. I expect that's part of it. And I think there's a bit of like a call out culture and a fear of kind of saying the wrong thing. And, like I'm genuinely nervous to tell people or to like communicate, even to friends, that I'm trying to lean up a bit because it's like, it's like, oh, we don't do that in climbing. We don't talk about going the extremes. It's like a taboo topic. Whereas for me, it's absolutely fine to do that, and it's totally normal, and it's like I say, it's part of my kind of job as a professional athlete in some ways, and I do it in a very healthy, controlled manner. And I've kind of I've been through so many different experiences with weight that I really understand what it is I need to do and how I manage that.
It sounds like you're objective about it, like you've taken the kind of emotional anality out of it to some extent.
Yeah, and I also know where as soon as I get below a certain weight, for me, that's not okay, and it's not okay because of the image it portrays. It's not okay because I don't think I should be a light climber. It's because it's a performance, so it is totally objective. I know if I get below 55 kilos, I can't train, I can't climb, I don't sleep as well, I don't recover as well, and I know that. But it's almost hard because I'm not trying to say to, like, young kids, "Find where your minimum is and where you fail." I don't think that's the right way to do it. It's just ultimately being how my career is formed. And I think there's a lot that we don't know, and I don't think that we're doing a good job of it in our sport right now. And ultimately, it's why I stopped breastfeeding, is because I lost too much weight trying to breastfeed and train. And I couldn't put weight on and train, so I ended up stopping when Frankie was 18 months because A, I wanted to sleep better, and B, I just couldn't get any weight on.
Yeah, I'm light as well, lighter than usual, but I'm a lot weaker than I usually am because I don't think I've lost that much fat. I've just lost loads of muscle because you just don't have testosterone, do you? Really, when you're breastfeeding.
I think even us talking about weight now, I think that, me saying the weights that I am could trigger some women into struggling with what I'm saying, like, oh my God, she's only 58, or she gets down to 55 and like I'm whatever. And I know that like around pregnancy, there's a whole host of kind of extra emotions that come with that. And I think that talking about being pre-pregnancy weight and how that's can really trigger other people to struggle with that idea. And
But
I
we
think
can't take responsibility for everyone and where everyone's at, because if we had to be mindful of that, we wouldn't ever talk about it, which is kind of what's happening in a way, right? It's really stilting the conversation.
And I don't. The last thing I would want to do is for anyone to become or kind of perpetuate their struggles and suffering by something that I've said or I've done. And that, I think, was what like scares me into not talking about it, because I don't want to make it worse. But then, yeah, like you say, it is making it worse because we're not talking about it.
Yeah, it's hard. All right, do you have a few more minutes for just a finish about motherhood?
Yes, of course. That's my favorite topic.
All right, so how's motherhood changed your relationship with you, your climbing, with performance, with all of this stuff that we've been talking about?
It's changed everything. I guess for me, I did the Olympics and then had the most insane month where my husband Ned, he published his book, Beast Making. I competed at the Olympics. We got married, like had my hen do as well in this month, and we got pregnant. So it was like, okay, everything has changed overnight. And also, I had this whole support system towards the Olympics. I worked with coaches and multiple different coaches, multiple different physios, kind of sports psychology, nutrition, kind of had all of this support network around me. And that basically disappeared overnight. And then I was pregnant. And obviously I trained my ass off. I was training 9 days out of 10. I would train 2 or 3 sessions a day for 9 days in a row. And then I just didn't have to train anymore. And I was pregnant and I couldn't fall because of my knee. So in terms of my relationship with climbing, I don't actually know how much like motherhood changed it as much as that whole process in itself. But I think there's been so many shifts in my outlook and in my approach because there's had to be. And I think I treasure the time that I do get to climb so much more than I used to, because it felt relentless going towards the games. And I don't think there could be much more of a stark contrast than training for the Olympic Games and returning to climbing postpartum. Like it felt like so separate. But I mentioned briefly earlier my kind of anxieties around rock climbing, which we'll be here a long time if we start down that avenue. But becoming a mother kind of allowed me to become a rock climber in the way that I'd always want to, kind of without expectation, externally and internally, and to really slowly explore that world, to be able to fall off a 7A and take my time on it and not feel all the emotions and the fear that come with that, as like, I'm supposed to be a pro climber. I can't climb a 7A or a V6 for our American listeners. And I'm just pulling a number out there, but I think motherhood allowed me to be vulnerable and content with that vulnerability as a rock climber, which I don't think I would have had otherwise. And then there's just so many different elements to it, to now see Frankie exploring the sport and getting excited about it, wanting to climb herself. If we go to the crag, if she's not got her shoes on before everybody else, her climbing shoes, something is wrong. Like, that kid is so psyched right now. I don't actually know how she has so much like ambition already, because she's just so miniature. It's like
Does that ever worry you
no,
that
not at
there's
all.
no, but
Because
like
I know that will be transferred to whatever it is that she's passionate about. I don't fear that kind of she'll get sucked into climbing because of us, because she is a stubborn little squish. Like, she is exactly a miniature version of me, and which is challenging at times. So, you know, if she doesn't want to rock climb or doesn't want to climb, I know that she won't. Just like if she doesn't want to brush her teeth, I know that she won't. Um, we have to get creative with that one. But yeah, it's cool to see her just to kind of explore what passion is and what joy is, and to find that in climbing sometimes, and other times to find it in smashing about on a bike or digging in the dirt. But what I've actually really enjoyed is kind of exposing her to the world of like pursuing something. So she sees, like, Ned and I go out climbing and fail, and she sees us succeed, and she sees kind of a whole spectrum of emotions that come with that. And I try really hard to be honest with her. I try as best I can to be like the mum that I want to be, which is really not an easy thing to do, and it comes with its own kind of stresses and anxieties around whether or not you're doing a good job, right? But yeah, it's so fun to be her mum, and like terrifying and incredibly hard at the same time. But yeah, being a mum has changed everything for me.
amazing. All right, last question. I asked Chat GPT to like give me a list of your achievements and stuff like that, just in like prep for this, even though we've not even really talked about your achievements that much.
I know. I'm like, people are
But
like, what has she even done?
yeah, I say it in the intros. But it said that you were retired, and I was
Yeah,
like,
oh
how
my
can someone
god.
be climbing V14 as a mum and be retired? Like, I don't know. I think I speak for quite a lot of people where, like, you know, you really inspired me as a competitor, but like you inspire me more now as a mum, crushing and
That's so
doing.
funny, like, hear you say that out loud, you know? Because I literally, in my brain, there's no part of me that would think that you would be inspired by me, because in my head, I'm like this little kid just trying to follow you around at the climbing gym still, like, annoying you, being like, "Hazel, will you take me big wall in?" I actually you were like, "No." I was like,
Hey, should
"Oh,
we
okay."
still do that?
You told me no. You were like, "I'm not hauling your bags." And I was like, "I could haul my own bags." And you're like, "No, you
I
couldn't."
said
That was
that.
that. Yeah.
Oh my God, I'm so cruel.
I was like, "Okay."
Can I change my response?
Yeah, we can grow from that.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
hilarious.
this one of my favorite memories about you.
Oh my God.
Getting back to that then. You asked me why I went to comp climbers because you told me I couldn't be a big waller.
This is the expose. It's just a Hazel shape to Shauna.
Yeah, my career was made out of the hard moments. Uh, I can't even remember the question now. Oh, yeah. So my biggest mistake in my entire career is using the word retirement. And honestly, I retired from comp climbing. Like,
Yeah. I
I'm
mean,
a
I get it. It's
comp
easy. It's easy distinction for me to
I'm like,
understand. I
it's
don't know.
not hard. Come on, Chat GPT. I thought you knew everything. So yeah, I regret that
But
because
who else is confused about it?
everybody. And it was so
Really?
mad going to the Olympics in Paris because I commentated there for Eurosport, which was so fun. Um, and so many of the other athletes, Olympians, like ex-Olympians, not ex-Olympians, they're Olympians, ex-professional athletes who are ex-professional athletes. You know, they were cyclists, or I think I chatted to someone who did golf, I chatted to someone who did tennis, and they were like, "So you're a retired climber now?" And I'm like, "No, I'm a retired comp climber. I'm still a professional climber." And they just couldn't get it. I had this conversation with Jess Ennis, you know, she was like, how do you still do your job as a climber professionally if you don't do
I
comps?"
mean, people ask me that question all the time. They say,
Yeah, but
how would
you
you
don't
have a
have the
job?
fact that you were a comp climber
Yeah.
beforehand. They're like, "No, I get that bit." And I
Well,
literally
technically, I was a comp climber, Shauna.
a professional comp climber.
No, I wasn't
This,
professional,
what
but
was
I
this?
was a comp climber.
I know. Um,
Um,
so yeah, like I this ex-professional cyclist who used to do the velodrome. She was like, wait, you climb rocks for a living? And I was like, yeah. She was like, what is the point? And I was like, you literally rode around in a circle. Like, come on.
I
But she
love that.
genuinely just couldn't get it. She was like, but you're retired from competing. And I'm like, yeah. So what is your job? And I'm like, to climb rocks. And basically now I've just entered into the world of trying to explain why the fuck someone would pay me to climb rocks, which, to be fair, I still question most days myself. I'm like, yeah, why do people pay us to this? This
I
is great.
question
I love
that
it.
too. Yeah.
And I'm very grateful. I absolutely love climbing rocks. But no, I very much feel like I am a professional rock climber, and maybe I need to start that distinguish that difference. But yeah, I don't think I'm retired from the rock world, or
No.
ever will be.
I'm gonna get on to ChatGPT to change its
Yeah.
content.
So can we start a petition on ChatGPT?
So people were really shocked when you ended your relationship with Adidas. Do you just want to finish by telling us what happened
Yeah,
there?
I mean, we can correct the sentence of they ended their relationship with me as opposed to the other way around. Yeah, they just didn't renew my contract, which was a big surprise and a big disappointment. I got many different reasons. I still don't know the reason. Which, yeah, it was pretty heartbreaking. It's probably one of the most kind of difficult scenarios I've had to deal with as a professional athlete, full stop, comp or rock. But it's ultimately the decision they chose and the direction they've chosen to go in. What direction that is, I don't know. I was invited out to an camp in November. We had a talk from the head of the sport. She stood in front of us and said how lucky we all were to be in that room, to be part of that family, how excited they were for the future. And then a week later, when I got home, I was told my contract wasn't being renewed. I was like, why did you just make me come to Germany for 4 days? Yeah, I was sat in rooms and asked for all my ideas on projects and future kind of brand campaigns and whatnot. The head of one of the departments came over to talk to me about kind of launching children's clothes and what they might do in the future, and like, would I be interested to chat? And I was like, oh. So when I said I didn't know this was coming, other than the fact that I hadn't had a renewal for my contract, then after that event, I was surprised, to say the least. Yeah, they like printed bags with our names on and gave them to us and all this stuff. And then, yeah, a week later, it was like, yeah, you're done. And it's a very similar story to other athletes who have had similar experiences with the brand who've been with them for a long time. I won't name them because I don't know if they want to be, but yeah, it's not a kind of, unfortunately, not a one-time thing, it seems. And it was like heartbreaking. It was really brutal. And it's probably the most embarrassed I've ever been, to kind of be taken out and to be sat in that room and to kind of have that experience around some of my closest friends, my longest friends in the sport, and then to be dropped. Like, this is not me leaving them. Like, yeah, they dropped me.
And, people will be watching this and be like, is that the motherhood penalty? Do you feel that or not?
It's hard to separate that. There aren't any other mothers on the team right now, so I don't know. There are guys that have kids, but there aren't any females that have kids. And I know that that's very much a narrative that exists in professional worlds. I don't know if that was the case here. It's almost like the hardest thing is that I never actually got an answer as to, like, we're not going to continue this relationship because of this. I actually never got anything from them. They only told my manager. After 10 years, like a decade with them, I didn't even get like a thanks, bye.
Wow, cutthroat.
Yeah.
Well, their loss, in my opinion.
Thanks. Well, it's my loss financially currently.
Well, any other sponsors out there want to sponsor Shauna? All right. Well, I'll leave you there because that's been epic. And yeah, I just thank you so much. I feel like every single topic we touched on, we could have spent an hour on, and it was such hard work to cover the bases. But hopefully, we had enough depth in there and did some of these like really difficult topics justice. But yeah,
we went through a whole host of like big topics, eh?
I know.
But I just want to say before the end as well, I think, like, thank you for all you've done for the sport as well, because like so many of these topics that we're talking about, I think you've been really kind of at the forefront of kind of breaking down some of those barriers for people and having those hard conversations. And like for me, you know, you were literally one of the first inspirations that I had as a little kid, and that remains the case now. And to kind of know that we grew up climbing at the same gym and to see the different journeys we've been on, I think is just it's just really cool. And now to be like on the other side of the sport kind of as parents, and to still be pursuing those goals and to see all that you're sharing and what you're doing for kind of people in the sport as well. I think, yeah, I just want to say thank you.
Aw, yeah, well, that's nice to hear, and keep doing what you're doing, and yeah, maybe we'll, go big walling together one day.
Yeah, I've
I'll have to
never
make
wanted to
up for
ask you again.
my
No, I will.
meanness.
Yeah, I promise I'll hold my own bag.
Yeah. I mean, you're gonna be the one leading all the pictures, so I'll just haul. I'm happy to do that.
How times have changed.
Yeah.
No, yeah, let me know. Let's get a date in. I'm here for it.
Yeah, nice. All right. Thank you so much for that.